And welcome back to Face to Face. And this good-looking young man next to me is not just a pretty face. Willem van der Post was audit partner at Deloitte and then the managing partner at their Center for the Edge. Now that's impressive. But I think the part of his life, he always amazes me because he's doing so much all the time. But the part that I think has amazed me most is that you're actually a headmaster. And I'm not kidding. Tell me more.
Stuart, thanks very much. Yes. So I've got a problem with the education system as a whole in the world. It's pretty much retrospective and knowledge-based. And the world around us has started to change fundamentally now with COVID even more so. The school that we've started is really a parallel program to existing schools because there are good things in traditional schools. But essentially, we believe that the default position for a lot of people when they see societal issues, and you'll pardon my French here, is to sit on the couch and bitch about it. And very few of them actually get involved in helping to solve it. So what we're doing is teaching kids of high school level that these flags of frustration in society where people complain about potholes and service delivery and government transparency and traffic lights that are out are all business opportunities. We shouldn't be bitching about them. We should be finding a way to solve them, making a profit out of it, which drives sustainability while serving society. So this school, X-Tech Institute, is aimed at doing that. We instill a paradigm of entrepreneurship and solution-mindedness around societal issues, but by using exponential technologies. And it really is as simple as that.
So you're giving them the skills which they're not the old world skills like this is how you fix a leak in your pipe. This is how to think so that you can use your skills to think about what's the next leaky pipe.
Spot on. We are all a product of our environments. And if your environment is to complain and to bitch and to bemoan the fact that there's a frustration issue, pretty soon you'll fall into that trap yourself. It's a vortex. And so this is an intervention aimed at saying, well, how do I cultivate a paradigm of opportunity and of optimism, but not naive optimism, optimism in that I can solve for this. And how we pair the two with this world of exponential technology is to say, nowadays, everyone knows the word AI. Okay, but do you know that there's 4 different types of AI, that there's no sentient AI, and can you go below the surface? Not because you need to be an engineer to build it, but if you understand the working thereof, you're able to marry that workability with a problem in the world, and therein lies value. Who wouldn't want to do that?
Yeah, I think I've always had a problem with the couch-sitting complainer. But you've lived in this space of IT certainly, well, way before we first met. And I think you got me really excited about what's going on, what we don't even know that's going on. What is going on? We realize that digital transformation is just another of those terms because yes, we all have a phone in our pocket. We're all doing that kind of stuff. Tell me what's going on in the world that's exciting and positive and is changing the world for all the right reasons.
So let's start like this. When humans are confronted with severe change as opposed to incremental change, they undergo an emotional roller coaster, and we pendulum. And all of us do it inadvertently. It's how we're physiologically coded. It's called the Gartner hype cycle. You go into from a trigger that exists, you get into a zenith of emotional expectation, which could be inflated expectations. And when the thing doesn't happen that you existed would happen, you fall into a trough of disillusionment, and all of that takes time. And then eventually, as the technology matures, your understanding matures, it goes beyond colloquialisms and superficial understanding, our thoughts and therefore reactions around this start to mature. So everything I'm about to say will probably evoke the same type of pattern emotionally in varying degrees. So what's happening worldwide? By my count, there are 16 exponential technologies. Why are they not just technologies? Well, because they double in their capacity or halve in their price on more or less a 9 to 11 month frequency. AI is one of them. We all now know the word AI. I don't think you can spend 30 minutes in any corporate walking around with someone saying blah, 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 AI. And if you ask them which AI, then you kind of get handbrakes and red lights and stuttering. So these 16 technologies are starting to converge. If you think about something like a driverless car, for instance, a driverless car in itself is not a technology. It's the convergence of things like IoT, so Internet of Things, billions of sensors that collect data, higher capability in data transmission, so 5G, Starlink, that sort of thing, LiDAR, AI able to drive the car, machine learning to learn about the environment within which you drive. So it's a whole series of technologies that are converging. And then we have to start thinking about, well, what are the effects of these technologies converging through the manifestations of things like self-driving cars? And I'll give you one that perhaps a lot of financial institutions miss when they ask, well, what exponential technologies should we know about? And the two that I say to them is 3D printing, and you should know about the convergence for self-driving cars. 3D printing now allows us to build homes modularly, not at a DC point and then transmit those modules to the ultimate use point, but to build it at the use point. And we're talking about 24-hour turnaround time on building a house that will cost you $3,500 US. Now, put that into the RDP perspective and filter that for the school perspective of societal problems that we're talking about in solving, and then see the opportunities that exist around this, giving so many thousands of people an identity and sense of home. All right, so you should know about that. But we also know in your business as an FSP or a financial services provider that the price point for property is supply-demand driven. And the supply used to be 9 months to build a residential home, 2 million Rand, 3 million Rand, whatever the number is. And we fundamentally shifted that to 24 hours and $3,000. So the supply of this has now been fundamentally impacted, which in turn means that the price point is impacted. And in there lies a business model revolution. Then you bring in the convergence of technologies that manifest in things like self-driving cars. And you say, well, perhaps the consumer does not need to live in downtown Sandton anymore or in a high rise, because the commute now means something fundamentally different, given that I don't need to do the driving. So actually, there are major car manufacturers in the world, the BMWs and Mercedes-Benzes of the world, that have employed designers to think about what the inside of a car needs to look like, given that the activity set inside of a car is likely to change. And I'm not saying this to push the lewdness barometer of this conversation, but there are actual considerations of where do you put the handles, given that people will want to have sex in their cars at some stage, or sleep or do work or activities other than driving.
But also, we were talking earlier, work from home actually becomes work from anywhere. So anywhere can be in the back of a car, which you know is being driven safely. So you don't have to worry about crashing into other things. Now it's your office because you need to get from A to B for whatever reason.
Spot on. And if that commute nature has changed in the way that you've just described, that means I, as the consumer or worker, might now choose to live in a place that is more attuned with nature or further away from downtown, which then also changes the demand side of the price point dynamic of property. If 60% of the world's wealth preservation is locked into property that used to be a good rental return at a steady 9% or whatever the numbers were, well, then potentially we've just touched by a few technologies some of the fundamentals associated with things like when you are able to retire, given the value that you've accrued and stored away. So there's a lot happening. Now, go through the Gartner hype cycle. What is your initial reaction to you might not be able to retire and you might have to live to 120? And there's a lot of oh shit moments in there, right?
And I hope you're not directing your question at me, because that's obviously a long way away.
A very long way away, specifically for someone as young as you. Stuart, so there's that reaction, and you have to filter for yourself almost to say, oh, there's so much change, and all of this planning that I've been doing around how my life will see itself in its twilight now is subject to change. And then a bit of disillusionment perhaps in saying, well, maybe we don't live to 120. Maybe the self-driving cars are 5 years or 10 years away. And then eventually some maturity around this. So I need to be a bit more fluid. I need to spot the opportunity inside of all of this, because the downsides are easily spottable and they're very easy to wear you down. COVID is the same thing. It in itself is not a disruptor. But if you think about it, it's almost supercharging these Gartner hype cycle frequencies. It in itself does not do much. No disrespect to anyone that has had personal touch by COVID in their family or themselves, but the casualty rate, if you just look at this transactionally from a numbers perspective, it's extremely low if you filter out immune compromised people or elderly people, underlying existing cardiovascular issues. The fatality rate is extremely low, and the world seems to be in that Gartner hype cycle itself, whether it's reacting very largely in terms of lockdowns, economic demise, and the weird policies that governments all over the world have put out, then to a trough of disillusionment. Think of Cyril Ramaphosa in South Africa, initially hailed, finally decisive leadership with direction. 5 weeks later, we're going to sue you for the regulations that you've imposed on us. It's typical Gartner hype cycle, up and all the way down, and hopefully now some maturation in our rationality and our thinking about this. And I think the personal opportunity for a lot of people, and specifically leaders in business, is to say, how do we fast track or skip some of these hyperbolic reactions and get to the maturity stage as fast as possible, given that this underlying world of exponential technology change is forcing the next Gartner hype cycle on us before we're done with the first one. And what you don't want to do is get caught in either the high or the low of either of these as they start to stack up and come your way.
I mean, to me, it makes so much sense that you can build a house in a day at whatever it costs. But as always, there's the red tape in the way. Now you've got to be able to say at the highest possible level, let's scrub every regulation which stops something like this and keep the rules which make it safe and people don't get ripped off and that kind of stuff. Do we have the capability of even doing that?
Look, regulation always lags innovation until innovation gets involved in the shaping of regulation. You saw it when ride-sharing services came to South Africa, and we had definitions for public transport and we had definitions for metered taxis, but we didn't have a definition for a ride-sharing service act. Concept was foreign, regulatory speaking. So you saw impounding, and then you saw same hype cycle, trough of disillusionment. Consumers want this, it's safe, it improves the quality, and it's actually cheaper. And then regulation introduced new definitions that also help to regulate this new area. But is there not a way that we can bring that forward? So in your house example, absolutely. Absolutely there is. There are some safety concerns which we can automate in all probability as regards strength testing of structures. And then it's about identifying land, consumer with need, and a way to finance. If you think about solar, which is also an exponential technology, or the arena of energy, we've had a reprieve for Eskom to be able to get their act in order, or at least make headway in that space, whilst the demand for electricity has been lowered. But soon when I don't think we go back to normal, but when the demand starts to stabilize again and increase, at an increased level rather, we don't want to be in a winter and a COVID-depleted economy without power to run it. So ought we not right now to be pushing for regulation that is friendly towards producing power? Like, I'd be very happy to put solar on my house and sell it to my neighbor. Very, very happy to do that. And a lot of people would. So the need is starting to pressurize, and this pressure cooker is building. My question is there not a way for us to supercharge even that part of the regulation? Almost experiment on regulation as POCs in designated areas so that we can fast track the learning.
I think you're touching on a point where the leadership becomes just so vital. And another discussion that we're sharing yours with talks about the importance of that leadership's ability to just change and accept younger, different, fresher opinions. Because if you don't do it, you're not allowing the full potential for growth.
Well, spot on, Stuart. And you talk about younger perspectives. I'll give you one that made the hair on my neck stand up when I heard it the first time. With the advent of big data, humongous data really, sensors and the digitizing of biology, we are now able to trace ancestral origins through DNA. It's known. You can do it for $80 and you get a full ancestral report as to where you come from. Now, in South Africa, we've got definitely some issues from the past that need to be addressed, and please don't think that I'm making light of this. But the regulation that has evolved in trying to deal with addressing issues of the past, has inside of that framework something called Black economic empowerment. But what is Black? The conversation that you and I are having, we look white on the face of it. I would definitely agree with that. And for 40 years, I've thought of myself as a white person. But then I get a DNA test back that says I've got Zulu forefathers and I've got Chinese forefathers. And though visually it might not represent itself, that is a definite part of my heritage, proven through empirical data. So if we're in an era of saying Black economic empowerment, are we inadvertently scoping in and out perhaps demographics technically that ought not to be in there because it goes against the spirit of what the act is trying to achieve? Moreover, with the disruption that COVID has caused in the world, are we perhaps in an era where we need to focus on South African empowerment as opposed to very specific demographics, which practically has also led to a very elite few group and economic prosperity for them? So again, I'm not criticizing from the couch. I'm saying I want to be involved in these conversations, but that would also mean that we have a certain level of frankness when it comes to disruptive talking. And we're not saying that the issues of the past aren't important to address. They are. But there's also the issue of the future.
We really have to have those conversations, but we have to lay some ground rules. You know, like you do with any think tank, you've got to say, okay, we're not allowed to bring up this, 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 or this. But if it was that easy, we'd have peace in the Middle East and a lot of other good things. Okay, so you are our new multicolored president from tomorrow. What are the 2 things you would introduce immediately?
All right, number 1 is I will make it attractive for talent and capital to come to South Africa from all over the world. I think that one of the ways in which you can do that, and this is by no means a perfect plan, thanks for springing the surprise on me, but I would give aggressive tax breaks to multinational big brand technology companies to come to South Africa, bring their people. Think about our time zone. We are perfectly positioned in the world to serve both the East and the West, as well as Europe. And so why not make it super, super aggressive, tax friendly for companies to come here, bring their people who will spend, incur debt, pay that, consume and help kickstart this economy back into hyperdrive is the first thing. And then secondly, I will aggressively invest in education. We've had 25 years and we haven't had of democracy, and we haven't had a whole bunch of new schools spring up. Why are we not trying to say something to the likes of draw the best teaching talent in the world to come to South Africa? If you do 5 years as a teacher in South Africa, you don't pay tax here at all. And you, I don't know, get one of the 3D printed homes for free. Some incentive, in other words, to draw the intellect and the teaching capability of the world to a nation where for a long time, the majority of which has been excluded from benefiting from education. So let's supercharge that. Let's not catch it up with traditional models over a 12-year cohort period. Let's supercharge this and disrupt the ordinary pattern of providing education and therefore livelihoods to people. And in that way, we're not getting only on the international stage, but we're also eradicating things like unemployment and by extension, poor health and high incarceration rates, crime.
I love both of those points, and we have to continue this conversation. That's for another week. Will you do it again with me in the near future?
I would do it with you any time of the week. Thanks for having me, Stuart. I really appreciate it.
And thanks for your time. Talk soon.
Thanks so much. Bye now.